This lecture has been made available to you courtesy of the American Numismatic Society.
And now to start off, I'd like to introduce the chairman of the Saltus Committee, Dr. Alan Stahl from Princeton, who is going to give the citation and then ask the artist. Thank you.
Thank you, Ute, and welcome to you all, especially Mr. Jähnig. I have a few words to read that are translated from the German, and I hope they don't sound too much like they're translated from the German. But, okay. There we go. Next slide, please. Yeah. There we go. You got that? Yeah. So tonight we're giving the J. Sanford Saltus Award for Signal Achievement in the Art of the Medal to Andreas Jähnig. Okay. Medals, sculptures, reliefs, ceramics, installations, drawings, prints, paintings, photography, and video. Andreas Jähnig masters various artistic forms. His work impresses with its thoughtful, committed, and impressive artistic contributions. He has a keen sense for social developments and disproportions. This inspires him and is the driving force behind much of his work. Jähnig is among those contemporary German artists who has lived and worked in Germany under two political systems, from 1951 to 1990 in the German Democratic Republic, and since then in the Federal Republic of Germany. He holds two academic degrees, which allow him a certain degree of independence. He graduated as a civil engineer in 1976 and as a sculptor in 1983 from the Berlin Art Academy. Since then, he has lived and worked on the site of a former oil mill in Bayreuth, located between Berlin and Dresden. Jähnig's medallic work began in 1976 and is diverse in its motifs and forms of expression. From the very beginning, there has been a juxtaposition of portraits, architectural and landscape depictions, as well as scenic themes. To date, he has created more than 200 medallic artworks, and for this work has won many prestigious awards, including this year the Hilde Breuer Prize of the German Society for Medallic Art, one of their top awards. As his medallic art has developed over the last 50 years or so, Jähnig has found a way to utilize the unique double-sided nature of the medal to create decidedly two-sided art, which is an important characteristic of his medallic work, and to develop a meaningful visual language, which distinguishes it from a small relief. He is a thoughtful and combative artist, continually striving for the appropriate artistic expression. This has led to larger medal series on themes that are of concern to him, such as the alienation of humanity from its natural origins, the destruction of nature, and, time and again, criticism of unbridled capitalism and its consequences. His medals can often be associated with a place and an event, without, however, striving for the topicality of something like a press release. Next slide, please. Thank you. Juxtapositions of the same activities in different forms or in different times illustrate his critique of human alienation. This is what he aimed to do with his series, Antiquity and the Present. Overfishing of the oceans using floating fish factories, for example, is contrasted with fishing in simple boats and with cast nets. On another medal from 1995, he contrasts the flight and expulsion of Germans at the end of World War II in 1945 with the flight and migration from war and hardship to the industrialized North. He writes, "The war drove people from their homes, cities, and countries. In long columns, the refugees moved through the devastated land in search of shelter and a home. In the suffering of our own expulsion, we all too early forgot that in 1995, people were also being expelled and wandering around in long columns of refugees. The expulsion of people is not just a thing of the past, but of the present also." Without words, he can also make a statement through different physical compositions on the same theme on both sides of the medal. When the church still stood in the village from 2003, the church on one side towers above the surrounding village houses, with the sky stretching high above it. On the other side, the mirrored church is wedged like a pre-modern relic into a landscape of skyscrapers toward which a wide street leads, choked with traffic. The duality of the medal can characterize an event and, in this artist's view, the consequences that result from it. For example, the door to freedom in faith, opened by Martin Luther in 1517, is contrasted with godless freedom on his 2011 medal. Thus, Jähnig places a cause and its consequence in a causal relationship. Jähnig has also found ways to use the medal's two-sidedness to depict simultaneously both an event and a place from different perspectives. On one side of his most poignant and powerful medals, commemorating the horror and tragedy of the 9/11 attacks here in New York, he shows on one side the view from the cockpit of the hijacked plane approaching the Twin Towers, while on the other side he shows the view from the window of an office in the tower immediately before the plane strikes. In 2014, Jähnig received the German Medalist Prize for this medal, Freedom in the Net, ? Here we see a bird's eye view of a rather oppressive scene. The center of the medal depicts the upper bodies of people touching a net with outstretched arms. We can't quite tell if they are contributing to its creation of being or caught in its threads. The net makes up most of the obverse and also covers the reverse. Its concave shape draws the viewers in and makes them part of the group at the center. The convex reverse, covered by the net, is reminiscent of a globe. The global network, the World Wide Web, is a product of the 21st century, and within 2 short decades, the digital transformation has now affected nearly all aspects of our lives. Jähnig's medal forces the question, will this network that we participate in daily ultimately rob us of our freedom? The idea of freedom and of the wall permeates much of his work. Those who lived east of the wall dividing Germany during the Cold War will still carry it with themselves. For others, it was merely a canvas for graffiti like freedom. Jähnig wrote in 2003 about the inspiration for the medal on the left. In East Germany, people had to live with the wall and free themselves from life within the wall. Nevertheless, they could not completely abandon the influence of the wall, which is visualized by this half-figure emerging from it. On the other side, no one can be seen because people on this side are less affected by the wall. Instead, there's the hollow phrase, freedom, painted on the wall, and in contradiction to this, traffic signs as symbols of a growing bureaucracy that destroys all freedom. Marginal phenomenon or the end of capitalism is the name of this 2018 medal, with which Jähnig expresses his cautionary view and at the same time moves the expression in parts of the margins of the medal. He once explained his perception of disproportion by saying that the world doesn't care what humans do to it, even if it becomes uninhabitable for the human species. Consequently, the relief engraved sides of the medal, which he usually designed on both sides, this time present a desolate, dark void. Humans are left with only the narrow band at the edge, all reminiscent of a doomsday scenario and talk of expansion into uninhabitable zones. A closer look at the pictogram-like groups reveals a horse-drawn cart, simple farming, and funeral rituals. Will this be the future of our children? Much of Jähnig's work addresses serious issues of our times and does so in a way that can focus the viewer's attention and even make the viewer uncomfortable. This is, in fact, the power of his unique expressiveness. He is able to distill complex issues into a dialogue between two sides, the obverse and the reverse, and occasionally the margin. It is in recognition of his remarkable vision and voice, as it were, that the committee and the Board of Trustees of the American Numismatic Society confer upon Andreas Jähnig the J. Sanford Saltus Achievement for Signal Achievement in the Art of the Medal. So, we have a medal. Would you please come here? Yeah. So, on behalf of the American Numismatic Society, I would like to present you with this medal.
Getting a medal in the ANS. I think he's German.
Yeah, after the event, we'll stage a photo. Okay.
Ich habe meinen Zettel gar nicht dabei.
Okay. So you all know I'm the probably quite inept translator now of what's going to come in German. So
Okay.
bear with us.
Ja, also lassen Sie mich noch kurz ein paar Worte zum Dank sagen zu der heutigen Preisverleihung.
Let me just say a few words of thank today about regarding this prize.
Zuerst Dank für die Laudatio.
Thank you for the oration.
Aber ich möchte an dieser Stelle auch den vielen Wegbegleitern danken, die durch ihre Gedanken, ihre Anregungen, Gespräche, Ankäufe dazu beigetragen haben, dass ich heute hier den Preis bekomme.
And also many thanks to the people that came along the way here, either as with ideas, as purchases, as
Ausstellungen, Ankäufe.
exhibitions and other things that
Okay. Das sind natürlich auch und nicht zuletzt meine Künstlerkollegen.
In particular, the artists and colleagues of mine.
In Berlin gibt es am Münzkabinett im Bode-Museum einen Kreis von Künstlern, die seit Jahrzehnten, kann man schon sagen, dort sich treffen und austauschen.
At the Coin Cabinet in Berlin, a group of medallic artists has been meeting for 2 decades at the cabinet and exchange ideas and meet there regularly.
Das sind in der Regel Bildhauer.
Mainly sculptors.
Und an der Stelle würde ich auch noch mal Namen nennen wollen. Ja.
Few names here, which we're going to get of the sculptors.
Also um diesen Kreis, dass er sich erhalten hat, dass er fortbestanden hat, haben sich natürlich Wolfgang Stegoweit, Bernhard Weiser und jetzt natürlich auch Johannes Eberhard verdient gemacht.
Yeah, so among the curators here, Stegowait, Bernhard Weiser und
Johannes
Eberhard.
Yeah.
These are the current generations of curators. And in fact, I should add here that Johannes is now going to replace on our advisory committee Bernhard Weiser. So it's going to a younger generation. Just
explain. Ja, also das sei auch, wie gesagt, gedankt für diesen wichtigen Beitrag. Es gab also auch in anderen Städten Versuche, so einen Kreis zu installieren. Ist eigentlich nur in Berlin erhalten geblieben. Und für mich eine wichtige, auch geistliche Heimat geworden.
So this group of sculptors and as well as the curators has been tried in other cities, but really only in Berlin has that become a reality and has been a sort of home, but also inspiration for your work.
Yes. Ebenso wichtig ist natürlich auch der öffentliche Austausch, also der Austausch durch Ankäufe, Ausstellungen von Sammlern, Publikationen und so weiter. Und da würde ich dann auch noch ein paar Leute nennen wollen.
So as important is the public engagement, and here in particular exhibitions, but also purchases by collectors and other people, some of whom will be named now.
Gerade in dieser Zeit 1990, 89, 90, wo viele Gewissheiten nicht mehr so gewiss waren, war es wichtig, da eine Unterstützung von dieser Seite zu bekommen.
So 1989, 1990, and I'm adding here, of course, this is the fall of the wall and the collapse of East Germany. Many of the certainties that one took for granted were taken and were replaced by some of these people.
Ja, und deshalb möchte ich an dieser Stelle nochmal Bernhard Weiser danken und Philipp Atwood und natürlich dir, Ute Wartenberg, eine ausgezeichnete Gastgeberin hier in New York. Und wir haben auch schon vorher Kontakt gehabt und uns ausgetauscht. Ja.
So you heard the names Bernhard Weiser and Philip Atwood in the British Museum, but also the head of BAMS, as well as myself, who've been on the way along there with both purchases, but also just engagement with Andreas.
Ja, ja. Also allen, die mich auf diesem Weg bisher begleitet haben, sei gedankt. Auch die vielen, die ich hier habe nicht nennen können, die sozusagen stellvertretend trotzdem auch meinen Dank erfahren. Und ich hoffe natürlich, dass Sie mich auch auf meinen weiteren Weg begleiten, der, das hatte ich schon angedeutet, vielleicht eine kleine Richtungsänderung in Zukunft haben könnte.
And so at the end, thanking all the people, not those that are mentioned, but also those that, you know, maybe know that they were on his side and helped. Thank you for being there, but also a look towards the future that there might be what our great artist is calling a change of direction, but he's decided not to elaborate on this now.
Gut, Ja, also dann, ich danke für die Aufmerksamkeit, ich danke für den Preis und die guten Wünsche und für die guten Worte, die hier über mich geäußert wurden. Ich glaube sie fast nicht.
So thank you again for all for the prize, for Alan's words and for everything that was said, which he says he can barely believe. So.
So, gut, ich danke dir. Danke.
Phew, I'm glad I don't have to translate most of the things. There's a reason why there's simultaneous translators, right? This is a degree. So this concludes now the section here on the award of the medal. And normally, as you know, the Stephen K. Scher lecture is followed. And this year, we have opted to take a topic that is not necessarily related, although some relation here, which is American peace medals. And the reason is that the American Numismatic Society is very proud to announce that Oliver Hoover has, after quite a few years, completed a truly monumental work of the collection of the American Numismatic Society, probably the most foremost and complete collection. I don't know whether there are others. This is a project that he started when he was a curator for a year at the American Numismatic Society. Oliver has his degree from Canada at McMaster and came to NYU to pursue graduate work. And then I was very lucky to encounter him at a crucial moment when the American Numismatic Society was trying to put together an exhibition at the Federal Reserve Bank. The title was Drachmas, Doubloons, and Dollars. It was opened in early 2002 by Alan Greenspan, and Oliver was the lead curator on this truly magnificent project, this exhibition run for 10 years. Part of this meant that Oliver, and to some extent I, went through the whole collection because we didn't really know it. And one of these medals that we looked at is a medal that's now in the back, which is a Lincoln medal, which was owned by a Ute, which was for me something very exciting. And I said to Oliver, wow, you know, what a collection. And the catalog was an old one. There was a previous, and Oliver at that point was supported by our most wonderful Ken Edlow. I don't know whether he is online, who donated the money for Oliver to pursue research over many, many years. And we finally came to a conclusion. The book is now out, and I'd like to also acknowledge Stax Bowers for a most generous print contribution towards the printing cost, which was completely covered, so that we have a really wonderful book. And Oliver, I should just say, is of course known for many different things that are more usually in the ancient field. He is the longtime author of a truly monumental handbook of ancient Greek coinage, which is in its, I don't know how many volumes now finished. How many is it, like 7 or 8? 8 or 9. I'm something that really nobody ever, which is published by C&G, and we're waiting desperately 2 volumes that apparently have been handed in. But he's also involved in many of the really truly massive projects on Ptolemaic coinage, as well as Seleucid coinage, both as an editor as well as an author. And those authors that work with him know that these books would not appear. He's co-author of the second Seleucid volume that appeared a little while ago. So Oliver is an extraordinarily talented person, and I'm really happy he's here tonight to give the Stephen K. Scher lecture. Oliver.
Thank you, Uta.
Next slide, please. As some of you know, I represent the little-known and rarely seen Canadian branch of the American Numismatic Society. Although I'm probably best known for my work on the coins of the Seleucid Empire, the next slide, please, and the money of the Hellenistic Near East, the Hellenistic Near East, Indian peace medals, and the memory of their original owners have been stalking me for a very long time. I just didn't know it. Maybe if I tell you a little bit about myself, you'll begin to see what I mean. I was born and spent my early childhood in Brantford, Ontario. This small city was founded in 1877 as part of what was known as the Haldimand Tract, some 3 million acres of land between Lakes Huron, Ontario, and Erie, purchased by the British from the Mississauga of the Credit River in 1784. Of this large area, 500,000 acres were granted by the British to the Mohawk and other members of the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy in recognition of their support during the American Revolutionary War, and to compensate for the loss of their lands in upstate New York. Brantford was named after this gentleman. Next slide, please. Chief Joseph Brant. He had been commissioned as a captain in the British Army in 1779 and was instrumental in obtaining the land grant. He visited England in 1775 when he was presented with the Silver Gorget. Next slide, please. For his assistance during the French and Indian War. Judging from this painting by Gilbert Stuart, Brant also received a medal. Next slide, please. The medal in the painting features a left-facing bust, and it may be a 1760 proclamation or accession medal of King George III. My grandparents lived in the city of Kitchener, Ontario. In 1864, in the small town of Urbsville, just outside the city, a local farmer is said to have plowed up this Happy While United medal, represented by a plaster cast in the ANS collection. Such medals in silver were cast in New York and given to Native American leaders by the British in a desperate attempt to retain or win back their friendship after the parsimonious policies of Field Marshal Jeffrey Amherst had alienated many of them. Having used Indigenous allies to help him conquer the colony of New France during the French and Indian War, Amherst then decided that they were no longer needed and ended the long-standing diplomatic practice of distributing gifts to Native American peoples. This change in policy caused a confederacy to form around the Ottawa chief Pontiac and sparked a war that lasted from 1763 to 1766. This so-called Rebellion of Pontiac ended with a negotiated settlement in which the traditional gift distributions were restored. In the summer when I was a child, my parents would occasionally take us to a rented cottage on Manitoulin Island on Lake Huron. The island presently includes reserves belonging to the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations, mainly at its east end. They had abandoned the island under Iroquois attack in the mid-17th century, but began to return following the War of 1812. Among the returning Ottawa was this man, Chief Little Knife. He had fought for the British in the War of 1812 and distinguished himself in battle on the Wabash River, during which he spared the life of an American captive who had wounded him. At the end of the war, Little Knife was awarded the silver-hilted sword shown in the painting in recognition of his bravery and mercy. He also received this medal of King George III, probably in 1836. He died on Manitoulin Island in 1853 after years of trying to get the $50 annual pension that he had been promised at the beginning of the War of 1812. After I got married, we moved to Burlington, Ontario, where a central feature of the downtown area is the house that Joseph Brant built around 1800. Burlington is about 2 hours by car in different directions from the cities of Sarnia and Peterborough, which saw the distribution of Queen Victoria medals to Indigenous leaders during the visit of her nephew, Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales, to the new province of Canada in 1860. This particular medal is said to have been presented to Chief George Powdash of the Mississauga, who welcomed the prince when he visited the Hiawatha Reserve just outside Peterborough. So as you can see, the medals in the memory of their original recipients have been pursuing me in the shadows for many years despite my ignorance. I only began to realize what was going on in 2001, when I worked with ANS staff to create the drachmas, doubloons, and dollars exhibit at the Federal Reserve, which ran until 2012. During the preparations, I was first introduced to the Society's incomparable collection of Indian peace medals. This remarkable Abraham Lincoln medal, which I understand is one of Uta's favorites, was ultimately included in the exhibit. It had belonged to a Ute chief named Hankapaka, who was shot in the chest in 1873. The medal stopped the bullet, but Hankapaka was knocked out cold. When he regained consciousness, he immediately went out and sold it to the Denver gunsmith, John P. Lauer. According to Lauer's memoir, the chief was disgusted with the medal because the spiritual power he had believed it to contain had failed. He thought that its power should have completely shielded him from bullets, but instead it served as a bullet magnet. Most of us here are numismatists of one stripe or another. We're the kinds of people who get excited about things like die identities, die states, and other technical aspects of metal production. The ANS Peace Medal collection certainly includes many objects of high numismatic interest. A good example is provided by the medals produced in 1757 for a Pennsylvania Quaker Friendly Association. These were distributed at the Treaty of Easton in 1758, which restored peace between the colonies of Pennsylvania and New Jersey and the native peoples of the Ohio country, thereby preventing them from supporting the French in the ongoing French and Indian War. Examinations of original examples shows that milled Spanish-American 8 reales, the standard circulating silver coinage of the Anglo-American colonies, were used to provide ready-made planchets. The milled edge of the 8 reales is still visible on the medals. And the extremely even strike of the medals is also very remarkable, considering that this could not easily be achieved with contemporary manual hammer striking, and screw presses for coining were not available in the colonies until after the Revolution. Presumably, the evenness was accomplished through the unusual production process, in which the dies were struck with a heavy sledgehammer. The greater force to be had from the two-handed blow of the sledgehammer, in contrast with that of the single-handed hammer often used in coining, as well as the distribution of that force over the larger face of the sledgehammer, seems to have produced the impressively even striking. The technical numismatic interest of the Quaker medals continued long after their original production. After the US Mint acquired the dies in the early 19th century, they were used to produce restrikes for the collecting public. The frequent production of the popular medals meant that the obverse die soon developed severe cracks that ultimately resulted in total die failure in 1875. While I can see the numismatic dopamine levels rising in the room, as I mentioned the high technical interest of the Society's Indian piece medal collection, this is not what I really want to talk about this evening. Instead, I would like to illustrate how the medals in the ANS collection provide a variety of biographies or miniature histories of the policies they represented, the Native American individuals who received them, and the institutions that produced and collected them. I will start with the medals as a reflection of Indian policy development, as this will provide an overview of the collection as a whole. In keeping with the interest of King Louis XIV in the use of medals for diplomacy and for magnifying the character of his reign among European contemporaries, silver medals were also introduced as awards and signs of honor for both French colonists and indigenous peoples who provided notable services to New France. The types used for these first French royal medals distributed in North America featured the king on the obverse and a depiction of his heirs on the reverse. These types cast the French king in the role of a benevolent father, concerned with the welfare of his children, with the implication that all children of such a father owed him their obedience. This sort of paternalism was a regular feature of French absolutism, but it also appealed to indigenous medal recipients who regularly expressed relationships between people in terms of kinship. Thus, the King of France came to be known to indigenous peoples as le bon père, or the good father. Under Louis XV, a new reverse type was introduced for use in North America, featuring the Roman allegorical figures of Honos and Virtus. These figures, who represent honor and manly virtue, stand clasping hands, and in a European context would have been seen as a classicizing expression of the king's martial prowess. In the North American context, however, the two figures were interpreted as a Frenchman and an indigenous leader joined as partners and kinsmen. It is reported that indigenous recipients of the medal often enjoyed having the figures pointed out and described to them in this manner by the French. And this interpretation truly expresses the character of New France. With a population of only some 80,000 French colonists, compared to the roughly 1.6 million colonists in the Anglo-American colonies by 1750, active indigenous participation in the French colonial project was critical. New France could not survive without its indigenous partners, as was discovered after the Marquis de Montcalm alienated most of his indigenous allies in 1757. New France fell to the British 3 years later. The situation in the Anglo-American colonies was different in that each colony was established as a separate enterprise with a focus on profit for individual proprietors under the king, rather than as directly royal undertakings. As such, there was no central royal authority dictating what medal types should be distributed to Native Americans to maintain friendly relations and to form alliances. Instead, it was left to individual colonial authorities to obtain or produce medals that they needed for diplomacy. In 1710, when Robert Hunter, the governor of New York and New Jersey, sought to gain the support of the Iroquois for an expedition against Quebec, he distributed medals that had been struck to celebrate the victories of English forces in the ongoing War of the Spanish Succession in Europe. This top piece celebrates the capture of Limburg, Huy, and Bonn by the Duke of Marlborough in 1703. Such medals were struck for other purposes in England, but were pressed into service in North America without much concern for typological messaging. The same might also be said of the King George II medals sometimes associated with a distribution to the Iroquois by Sir Danvers Osborne when he became governor of New York in 1753. The Quaker medals and the Happy While United medals, already mentioned, shift from this use of medal types that would have been largely irrelevant to indigenous recipients to ones that take a cue from the Honos et Virtus medals by depicting a Native American and a colonist in friendship, including a prominent peace pipe. This development was dictated by the lack of imported English medals in emergency situations, and by the fact that the medals were produced to address specific breakdowns in the relationships between Anglo-American colonists and surrounding Native Americans, rather than to form military alliances. The somewhat haphazard use of different medals in the Anglo-American colonies continued even in the British medals distributed to Native American allies during the American Revolution. Oops. Sorry. Although a standard medal type featuring the royal bust and the British coat of arms seems to have been intended, perhaps following the model of the earlier medals of King George II, in 1777, a different allegorical reverse was used for the middle-sized medals, and a marriage portrait type was used for the small medals, as you can see here. The tendency to press generic medals and sometimes inappropriate dyes into surface to meet the need for medals in the colonies continued even as British North America stood on the threshold of becoming the Dominion of Canada, as can be seen from the re-engraved medals distributed during the 1860 visit of the Prince of Wales. When medals were needed to seal treaties made by the United States with Native Americans immediately after the Revolution, it was hampered by a lack of equipment for striking them. Therefore, instead of striking medals, in the early 1790s, the United States had them engraved. With an apparent awareness of earlier Native American dissatisfaction with British medals in comparison with those of the French, the new engraved medals were large and heavy and shared iconographic traits with both French and British medals. Like the British medals, the reverse featured the heraldic type, the Great Seal of the United States. Meanwhile, the obverse depicted two standing figures in emulation of the French Honos et Virtus type. However, while Honos et Virtus required explanation to make them into a Frenchman and an indigenous chief, this was not necessary for the engraved United States medals. The figure on the right is clearly George Washington, and the figure on the left is an unambiguous Native American smoking a peace pipe. The engraved Washington medals of the early 1790s may or may not have been preceded by this 1789 dated piece. This medal was long considered authentic by most authorities, but this has been challenged in recent years, largely based on the crudeness of the engraving. But if authentic, it would provide a transition between the popular Honos et Virtus medals and the Washington medals. The piece, dated 1789, takes the Honos et Virtus medal as its obvious model, with the drapery of the Native American figure roughly mimicking that of Honos, and with Columbia Minerva clearly taking the place of Virtus and wearing a similar crested helmet. The plow on the 1789 dated medal and the plowman in the background of the Washington medals indicate that there is more to the message than the simple expression of friendly cooperation, as on the earlier French medals. These added features reflect Washington's personal view that the unstoppable advance of settlement would ultimately destroy Native Americans, and that the only way to save them was to teach them to take up the settled lifestyle of a European farmer. This desire to save Native Americans through agrarian acculturation was expressed with much greater clarity on the medals struck in England by Bolton and Watt for Washington's second presidency. These pieces, mistakenly described by 19th century numismatists as season medals, depicted three important agricultural occupations: sowing the field, maintaining livestock, and spinning wool and weaving. The types visually depict the points made in a speech given by Washington to the Cherokee in 1796, in which he noted that he would perform these same kinds of agricultural labor, which he recommended to them. The relationship between the types and the speech become even stronger if the figures of the sower and the shepherd in the season medals were indeed intended to represent Washington, as is sometimes suggested. Washington's acculturation dream disappears from the new medals produced by the US Mint under Thomas Jefferson. These feature the much simpler reverse type of two clasped hands, representing the Native American and the United States, with a crossed tomahawk and peace pipe above to visually express the peaceful relationship indicated by the legend. Jefferson and his successors in the presidency through the 1840s generally recognized Native Americans as sovereign peoples with whom it was necessary to make treaties to gain legal title to their land and to prevent the encroachment of Great Britain and Spain in the West, opened by the Louisiana Purchas. The clasped hands type succinctly expressed the idea of two sovereign nations coming together in peaceful agreement. During the Lewis and Clark expedition, however, the United States also found itself falling back into old British habits. Desirous of impressing as many Native American chiefs as possible, the expedition distributed not only current Jefferson medals, but also Washington's season medals, and in one case, a US silver dollar pierced for suspension. Likewise, under Jefferson's immediate successors, whose medals all employed a variation of this reverse type, of his reverse type, sorry. There are often problems with the preparation of the portraits that delayed production. Thus, James Madison was forced to distribute Jefferson medals to a native delegation in 1812 because his own had not yet been struck in time. Unfortunately, the recognition of Native American sovereignty that informs the clasped hands reverse type began to have negative consequences in the 1830s, when it was deemed unconstitutional for a US state to contain another sovereign people within its borders. This led to the coerced westward removal of Native Americans to reservations in the ever-shrinking Indian Territory, which by 1890 consisted of only of the part of the state of Oklahoma. In the 1850s, however, US Indian policy shifted its emphasis from the removal of Native Americans and instead began to question Native American sovereignty. This essentially led back to George Washington's original views on acculturation and is reflected in the new medal reverse types that first appeared under Millard Fillmore and continued in various forms until the end of the 1860s. The Fillmore reverse, which was engraved by Joseph Wilson, takes many of its cues from the engraved Washington medals, as can be seen in the two-figure design, the inclusion of the tree on one side, and depictions of cattle and agricultural equipment. The addition of the flag, however, seems to allude to manifest destiny and the inevitability of assimilation. Wilson's reverse may have enjoyed some international popularity as a type for medals to be distributed at treaty signings. The medals engraved by J.S. and A.B. Wyon for the numbered treaties of the Dominion of Canada in the 1870s appear to take note of this reverse type. The Treaty Commissioner and the Indigenous Chief of the Canadian medals are similarly positioned and have their legs posed in an almost identical manner to those of the Indian Agent and the Native American on Wilson's reverse. In both cases, the Commissioner and the Indian Agent are distinguished by their hats and the chiefs by their high feather headdresses, while a hatchet or a tomahawk is located between them. Returning to the United States, Wilson's reverse for the medals of James Buchanan also strongly emphasize assimilation in the depiction of a Native American chief with aspects of white American culture, including a baseball game and a church in the background. Except for his attire, which clearly identifies him as a Native American, the plowman otherwise appears to be fully assimilated and seems to represent the fruition of Washington's desire for Native Americans, indicated by the plowman in the background of his original engraved medals. The reverse of the medals of Ulysses S. Grant depicts a globe of the Western Hemisphere set upon farming implements and surmounted by the Bible to advertise his much vaunted peace policy. This placed the reservations under the administration of Christian religious groups with the intent of fully assimilating their inhabitants. At the same time, the Indian Appropriations Act of 1871 ended all treaty making between the government and Native Americans, who were now deemed to be wards of the state rather than sovereign peoples. The absence of a figure or a hand to represent Native Americans that had appeared on almost all previous medals is telling. After this, the government largely abandoned medals in their interactions with Native Americans, except as occasional rewards. However, the Mint, which had developed a healthy collector's market for restrike medals, continued to produce them despite lagging official interest, and introduced a new oval form with a suitably traditional assimilative reverse type by George T. Morgan. The new shape was not especially well liked by the few Native Americans who received them, and prompted the request for new round medals by a delegation of Oto and Missouria chiefs when they came to Washington in 1890. These were produced at their own expense, but the dies were subsequently used to strike medals as rewards for Native leaders who had supported the smooth implementation of U.S. policy, such as the 1887 Dawes Act, which divided reservations into individual allotments, thereby allowing the sale of the resulting surplus land to the government. While the typology of the medals provides a kind of macro-biography for North American Indian policy, numerous pieces in the ANS collection also provide microbiographies of the individuals who owned them in the decades before they entered the cabinet. In many cases, the names of these individuals are known because they're inscribed on the medals or because they were purchased in the 1920s from Walter Wyman, a prominent collector and dealer in Native American artifacts, who often obtained items directly from people on the reservations. These are two notable examples. At the top is an Andrew Jackson medal belonging to the Sioux chief Jacob Bearshield, as indicated by the prominent inscription on the reverse. Below is a Ulysses S. Grant medal, which has had its edge engraved to name Chief Pia of the Nevava Utes. Both individuals are known from photographs taken in the late 19th century and from documentary sources. Bear Shield was a participant in the famous defeat of General Custer at the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, and later lived at Wounded Knee in the Pine Ridge Reservation. He was still alive when the medal entered the collection in 1926. But as Bear Shield was too young to have been the original recipient of a Jackson Medal, it must have been passed on to him by kin or obtained from a previous owner through battle or trade. Pia, on the other hand, was the chief of a Ute band in Colorado who traveled with other Ute leaders to Washington to sign the Bruno Agreement in 1873. This agreement ceded the gold-rich San Juan Mountains within the Ute Reservation to the United States in return for annual payments of $25,000 and provided the occasion for Pia to receive his medal. Unfortunately, the increased presence of white settlers and miners that followed led to conflicts in which Pia was often implicated. He subsequently came to be vilified by Colorado newspapers as a figure of pure cussedness. When the Utes and of the Milk Creek Reservation rose up against their repressive Indian agent in the so-called Meeker Incident of 1879, the involvement of Pia was widely assumed, even though he was not present at the time of the violence. Nevertheless, like most Colorado Utes, he was removed to the Uinta Reservation in Utah in 1881. A few years later, after learning of Grant's death, Pia reportedly sold his medal on the assumption that its spiritual power had departed with the life of its giver. A final example is a James Monroe Medal associated with Chief Smutty Bear of the Yankton Sioux. This medal does not have the name of its owner inscribed on it, but it came with a tag indicating that it had belonged to the chief. He probably received the medal in 1825 when he was one of the Yankton signatories to a treaty of friendship with the United States. Despite his personal opposition to giving up sovereignty, he ultimately signed the 1858 treaty that created the Yankton Sioux Reservation. A decade earlier, Smutty Bear had despaired that the influx of American traders and their goods was undermining traditional tribal organization and making it impossible for his people to hear his warnings. In a conversation with a US Indian agent in 1848, he is recorded to have complained about private medals distributed by the fur trade companies, which undercut the authority of chiefs with official medals to such an extent that he set aside his own medals, considering them to be all but worthless. The Monroe Medal is probably one of the medals that Smutty Bear set aside in frustration. The ANS also possesses examples of the medals that caused him such grief. While the the US government officially forbade the distribution of private medals to Native Americans, the St. Louis Fur Trade Company of Pierre Chouteau Jr. and Company distributed their own medals in the early 1840s, claiming that they were not actually medals, but only decorative ornaments. Their close similarity to official large Martin Van Buren medals and the damage that they caused are both obvious. Within a few decades of the first Jefferson medals, it became clear that Indian peace medals were objects appreciated not only by Native American recipients, but also by white collectors. Realizing that there was money to be made for the US Mint and for themselves, in the 1840s, Director Robert Patterson and Chief Coiner Franklin Peel began producing restrike medals in earnest, frequently off the books, and marketing them to collectors as the Presidential Series. But there was a small problem. As everyone knows, collectors love complete sets, but completeness was impossible for the Presidential Series. Washington's medals had been engraved, not struck, and no medals had ever been produced for John Adams or William Henry Harrison. A proposal for a John Adams obverse die was submitted in 1845 by Allen Leonard, who hoped for a job at the Mint. Patterson rejected this rather unflattering portrait, but it was clearly used by someone to produce cast medals, probably in the mid-19th century. Patterson was replaced as Mint director by George Eckert in 1851, and in 1854, Franklin Peel was removed from his post as chief coiner under a cloud of accusations that he had been using Mint equipment for private gain. Nevertheless, the idea of the presidential series as a cash cow for the Mint had taken hold and was pursued by their successors. When old dies for a small John Adams medal engraved by Moritz Fürst was discovered in the 1878 sale of the Mickley collection, they were quickly obtained to gain the portrait die for use in the presidential series. This white metal piece, which has sometimes been considered a U.S. Mint restrike for William Henry Harrison, actually seems to be a cast medal made by using the obverse of the Congressional Medal of Honor awarded to Harrison with a manipulated legend and the reverse of an Indian Peace Medal. The casting raises doubt that it was actually produced at the Mint, but the fact that some enterprising individual thought to create it illustrates the high public demand for a complete presidential series, which the Mint wished to harness. No Harrison medal was ever officially struck for the presidential series, but at the end of the 19th century, chief engraver Charles E. Barber produced a portrait die for George Washington, so that the first U.S. president could finally be included in the series, thereby filling its most glaring hole. Barber's portrait was closely based on the famous Washington before Boston medal of Duvivier. While the last official Indian Peace Medals were distributed in 1892, the presidential series invented by Robert Patterson and Franklin Peel lived on. Several iterations of the restrike medals were produced by the U.S. Mint in the 20th century, primarily in bronze, and a new version in silver was introduced for collectors in 2018. Through their accession histories, the Indian Peace Medals also tell the story of the American Numismatic Society and the interesting individuals of all walks of life who have made up its membership over the years, particularly in the early 20th century, when work to assemble the collection was at its peak. Names associated with specific donations range from those of regular member collectors who subscribed with others for the purchase of objects on behalf of the society, to a veritable who's who of ANS presidents and major patrons, including such figures as Andrew C. Zabriskie, Edward T. Newell, and of course, J. Sanford Saltus. The original core of the Indian Peace Medal collection was provided by Daniel Parris Jr. Between 1865 and 1883, he served the ANS in various capacities. And when President Charles Anthon died unexpectedly in 1883, he filled the vacant leadership position. In the same year that Parrish became president, he donated 27 Indian Peace Medals to the ANS. All were U.S. Mint restrikes except for one small silver James Madison medal, the very first original Indian Peace Medal in the Society's collection. Also of critical importance in developing the collection of original silver Indian Peace Medals was the successful New York banker and ANS member Stephen H.P. Pell. In 1815, he donated the spectacular 1793 engraved George Washington medal from his personal collection and arranged for the donation of 15 further pieces through the subscription of ANS members. Thanks to this gift, combined with later purchases, the Society today boasts a silver Indian Peace Medal in almost every size for every US president under whom they were struck. The collection of restrikes also owes a significant debt to J. Coolidge Hills, a longtime member of the ANS from Hartford, Connecticut, who was passionate about collecting medals. At the time of his death, he had assembled a vast collection, but found himself torn between his love of his hometown and his love for the Society. Therefore, he bequeathed his entire collection to the Hartford Athenaeum with the proviso that it always be displayed in its entirety. If the day ever came when this was no longer possible, the entire collection was to be transferred to the ANS. That day came in 1967, bringing some 23 Indian Peace Medals into the Society's cabinet, of which 2 were original silver pieces. No summary overview of the life of the ANS through the lens of the Indian Peace Medal collection would be complete without mention of Bauman L. Belden, who served as librarian and a counselor before assuming the chairmanship of the Society's Committee on Indian Peace Medals in the first half of the 1920s. Although he personally contributed only a single brass medal of King George I to the collection as a gift, as chairman, he sought out numerous original French, British, US, and Canadian medals and galvanized the Society to purchase them. In the same way that the objects chronicle the involvement of ANS leadership and collector members, the medals also indicate the role of the Society's dealer members in building up the collection. Medals struck to express the friendship of Oklahoma trader Edward Knox Elder with Chief Baconrind of the Osages were produced in 1911 with the involvement of his well-known numismatic dealer brother, Thomas Elder. Several of the specimens of this medal in the ANS collection were donated by Thomas Elder in 1912. Likewise, in 1947, Waite Raymond donated a mysterious copper piece that has sometimes been interpreted as a pattern for an Indian Peace Medal produced for Congress by Albion Cox, who is perhaps better known for his involvement with New Jersey state coppers. The story of the ANS, as told by the ANS Peace Medal collection, is one of the leadership and membership coming together to achieve a common goal: the creation of the largest and most complete public collection of Indian Peace Medals in the world. But this story is not one that belongs solely to the past. It is continued in the present, in ANS Executive Director Ute Wartenberg-Kagan's interest in publishing the collection as a book, ANS Treasurer Ken Edlow's financial support for its writing, and Stax Bauer's Gallery's subsidizing of its printing, for which we can all be grateful. Thank you.
Willing to take questions, and maybe we can see who online, if there are questions, because that runs to the other room, but we can start here in the room. Peter, you can run these questions yourself.
Okay,
Just
sure.
look at the.
Thank you. The Buchanan medal that you showed and discussed, the reverse of, which shows a plowing scene and baseball and so forth. The one thing that you did not discuss was the figures on the rim, which...
Oh, yes.
Yes, so I couldn't quite tell what was going on, but it didn't seem all that peaceful.
Yeah, that was comparing the old way of Native American life from the artist's perspective, which was full of violence and a typical stereotype, scalping, and then contrasting it with the central piece, which is fully assimilated, except for the outfit, into an American lifestyle. Yeah, that's actually discussed in a lot more detail in the book. Yeah.
Oliver, what do you think is the most significant piece medal the ANS has? Can you repeat the question? What is the most significant piece medal?
What is the most significant piece medal? This is a very difficult question because so many of them are significant in different ways. Personally, I think I find it very significant that we have so many that have people's names attached to them, and you can find who these people are, and you can find out, what their lives were. But, if you're talking in terms of value, I'm sure it's one of the engraved Washington medals. Oh, yes.
Now, you were talking about Jeffrey Amherst, and of course, his role in alienating the Indians. But of course, there was also Sir William Johnson, who was very prominent as far as dealing with the Native Americans. And, though you're focused on the Indian peace medals, there was a huge industry in silver trinkets, trade silver, which the Indian peace medals were actually just a small part of. I mean, there were major manufacturing centers in Montreal and Quebec and Philadelphia and Boston, all throughout, New England and Canada. And that was actually probably occupied more of this, this focus on silver and trading with the natives. Of course, a lot had to do with trading for beaver pelts and things like that. But they were also, they were awarded those things, and you have everything from armbands and ear bobs and a whole host of items that were made in silver, at that time, in addition to the peace medals.
It was very popular for exchange and for keeping up diplomacy. We have an online question here. Pre-1800 peace medals were mostly minted in England. Any in America? The Quaker medal was minted in America. The Happy Wall United medals in America. Of course, the George Washington engraved medals, although the struck season medals were produced in England. I'm trying to think of what else have I. Oh yeah, Virginia. Yeah, the Virginia Happy Wall United medals.
Very early ones.
The.
Pre-monkey.
Oh yes, yeah, yes, yeah. Sorry, I think of those a little more as badges than proper medals, but yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that covers everything that I can think of produced in America. Jesse, yeah. Oh.
I'm going to give you a softball, the easy one here. You had kind of alluded to this throughout the talk, but can you explain the difference between silver and bronze Indian peace medals?
The difference?
Yeah.
In
their
usage?
use? Yeah, and why they exist. Why are there two different compositions of them?
Oh, well, the original medals were usually produced in silver. The bronze ones come out as part of the U.S. Mint's restrike program, although some of the late oval ones were actually distributed in bronze. There's a photograph in the book of there's a chief. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. He's a Yankton Sioux gentleman who had some given to him, and he wears them, but they're not the regular official ones. They like silver, and I wonder if the preference for silver is because it's a white color, and the tradition of white wampum as in a belt for indicating a piece being made. I wonder if there's some relation between the color involved.
White, I think, represented, purity and light and all that, because it's interesting, but the natives actually preferred silver to gold.
Yes,
and
yeah,
in
I
fact,
think because of the color.
Right, because of the color, and in fact, that's why you'll see a lot of the metals over time, as they tarnish, they would take, sand or whatever and buff them to bring back that silver coloration to get rid of the tarnish.
Yes? Oh.
Yes, I know that the hand-engraved medal given to Peter Le Charoux that used to be in the ANS cabinet has been repatriated. Are there others of these medals that are subject to claims of repatriation or issues connected to that?
One other, it was a very rare Lincoln piece, which had been dug out of a grave, and the documentary evidence for it is very clear. Yeah, but I'm not aware of.
Nathan Elkins would be the right person to answer this, but Nathan did a full-fledged analysis with the staff, and Jesse, you were involved, and we returned every single piece that fell under NAGPRA. This was quite in the last 5-6 years, isn't it? Not even. That was, yeah. So.
There were 3 pieces in total. There was the Pedalacharo piece, there was the very rare Lincoln piece medal, and then there was a third piece which wasn't a piece medal but a small brass medallion that did have documentary evidence that it was out of a grave. But yeah, 2 Indian piece medals and then one non-piece medal.
Nobody online? No, I see nobody. Then I want to thank Oliver again for this fascinating talk. No, Ben. Oh no, Ben Damsky is waving. Okay, Ben.
I don't have a question. I have a comment, which is really, I cannot think of a better project for the American Numismatic Society than this. It's quintessentially American, and I mean American in the broader sense, including Canada. So it's just a wonderful idea, and it seems to have been carried out beautifully. So bravo.
I want to thank you for really this excellent comment, and maybe I see Ken Edlow, you see, is there, when I first asked Ken, would he support this, in these one days when there weren't that many people supporting various projects like this, he was very generous, and I really want to thank him. And there have been many other people that support projects, and we're looking always, because it's a very specialized enterprise, and we have Jesse as our American curator, but the collection is absolutely enormous, and in fact it's constantly growing. So having these catalogs, in print, I think is a wonderful thing, and we exhibit them here. I want to say that we hope that maybe we'll exhibit some of them this year. We're in discussion maybe at the ANA Fair of Money in Pittsburgh. There might be an exhibition to really highlight this extraordinary collection. But I want to thank Oliver again, but also I want to thank and congratulate Andreas Jähnig. Herzlichen Glückwunsch. And I want to thank also Alan for being here, and Alan for running the Saltus Committee in a most effective and wonderful manner, which is always the strength of the ANS in recent years. And so thank you, Alan. Thank you all for participating, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next event when we have that. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.